Oh, good morning. It's good to see everyone. You ever feel like you're playing a part in life that is not really you? I tell you, I grew up with an older brother, and he was a good athlete, he was a good student, and he was popular. I, on the other hand, was not a good athlete, was not a good student, nor was I incredibly popular. And so somehow, some way along the way, I ended up filling a role, playing a part. And the part that I ended up playing was I was the underachiever. I was an underachiever and somewhat the class clown. I really don't know how I got that, but that was imposed upon me. So, in fact, I'll even tell you, there was one time I was doing a Christmas play at church. And back in the 70s and 80s, we had little Christmas plays and different things. And that particular year, I was a clown. I don't know why I was a clown. I don't know if there's a toy store or something like that. But I was a clown, and so part of it was we would stand on risers and we would sing our little songs and different things. And the risers, I think, were the first risers ever made for choirs and so on. And so they were really old, and they wrapped them with shiny paper. Now, to be a clown, I actually had to wear socks, like these silly-looking socks and so on. So socks on really shiny, slick paper do not go really, really well together. So as I'm getting up on the risers, I slip and I fall. And everybody knowing that it's me, they just thought that I was being me, that I was being a clown, that I was seeking attention. And the reality is I'm glad I had all the clown makeup on, because I was probably beat red and embarrassed and hated the attention. But that was the part I played. And so when I got into high school, again, teachers expected, because of the reputation that had been built, that I would be there for comedic pleasure and not necessarily there for academic excellence. Let's just put it that way. And so again and again and again, I was that guy. But it never really fit. It never really felt like this is who I am. It was just the part that I was expected to play in life, so I kind of went along. But there was another part that I played. We're going to call this the church part, the church self. You see, I grew up in the church, and I would go to church every Sunday, and we would put on our Sunday best. Y'all remember when Sunday best was not jeans, cons, and an untucked shirt? So we put on our Sunday best, and we go to church, and we would have our Sunday face, and we would, and shake hands and how are you, and how are you, and how are you, and we knew the right things to say, and we knew the right things to do, and we played that part really well. And so that was a part that I learned how to play really well. But there was a point in my life where I discovered that even though I knew how to play the part, my heart was far from God. And so my life became just a lot of different parts to play at different times. And maybe today you're playing a part. Maybe today you are the person that everyone sees is really not you. In fact, the part that everyone sees is what you believe people want to see, or what you think they need to see, or it's you're afraid of letting people see the real you, and so you present this different version of yourself. Maybe it's that your life is all together. Maybe that your life is perfect. Maybe that your life is like the ideal life, because you don't want anyone to see that your life is really falling apart. Or maybe your marriage. Maybe your marriage is struggling today. But you and your wife, you come and you put on the picture of the perfect couple. Maybe it's as simple as, I don't have this whole Christianity thing figured out. I don't have what it looks like. I just don't know what it looks like to walk with Jesus. And so I'm just going to play the part that I think everybody wants me to play, so they don't see the real me. And so if you've ever kind of been in that role, and maybe you're here today and you're playing the part, and whatever part that is, I want to let you know that you're not alone. Because actually there's a story in the fifth chapter of Acts. That's where we're going to be today. We're going to be in Acts chapter 5. We're going to start with verse 1. And so if you have your Bibles, your phones, the Bible in the seat in front of you, whatever it might be, we'd invite you to turn there. But this is a story where I think people are playing a part that is not them. So let's go ahead and dive in here this morning. Let's look at verse 1. And we're just going to go through this and just understand that sometimes we might be able to find ourselves here. Let's look at verse 1. It says, "But a man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, 'Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? And you have not lied to men, but to God.' When Ananias heard these words, he fell down, breathed his last breath, and great fear came upon all who heard it. The young men rose and wrapped him up, carried him out, and buried him." And the story continues. Because notice his wife is not with him, but his wife is about ready to come on the scene. Notice verse 7. "After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened, and Peter said to her, 'Tell me whether you sold the land for so much.' And she said, 'Yes, for so much.' And Peter said to her, 'How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out.' Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. When the young men came, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard these things." I don't know what to do with this. Just a little bit of self-disclosure. Back in October, when I went away for a week, and I usually do this every year, I plan out an entire year of messages, give or take. You know, there's a little bit of room to add and take away, but I plot out the year. And so back in October, I was up in Pagosa Springs. And I was in a cabin, and I was just like poring over the book of Acts, and I planned out an entire series on the book of Acts. And when I got back, Jim said, "So are you going to do Ananias and Sapphira?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." And he goes, "Good call." But through some study, through actually some personal study of the book of Acts and journaling and prayer and different things like that, I just felt compelled to go ahead and add this sermon to our series. And folks, preachers don't like to preach this. There was actually a preacher, a very well-known preacher. His name was C.H. Spurgeon, and they discovered that after he had passed and so on, he had just this treasure trove of all of his sermons. And they said at one point in time there were 63 volumes of all of his sermons, and not one of them on this passage. Good call, Spurgeon, right? But I think there's something here. I think there's something that there's really here that will kind of help us understand that there's something very relevant here. And there's something very raw in our walk with Jesus. But I think to understand that, we have to kind of go back a little bit. Jim's going to cover this passage along with another passage in later chapters, kind of bookend them together. But we find a snapshot of the church at the very tail end of chapter 4. And it's telling us that Christians were selling property and selling goods. And if one person had a need, they were meeting that need. And it was just this extension and overflow of the love that they had for Jesus that was going on. But in this passage, we read about Barnabas. And it's the very first time in the Bible we read about a man by the name of Barnabas. Barnabas, his real name was Joseph, but everybody called him Barnabas because Barnabas means encouragement. And so every time we see him, that's what he's doing. He's helping, he's encouraging. And here, what we find is he sells a piece of property and just gives it to the church. He just, here, do whatever you need with this. Divvy this up. Help people in this way. And so it kind of gives me a clue that maybe Ananias and Sapphira were looking back at what Barnabas did and said, we want to be like him. And so the reality is, great works often invite counterfeits. Think about that here for a moment. I think it's important to say that no one in their right mind, no one in their right mind will counterfeit monopoly money and pass it off for real. Why? Because it's not money. It has no value, has no profit in that. People will counterfeit money because they understand that there's profit and value that comes from that. Same thing with art. Now, I'm just going to tell you, one of the things in my life that I have not excelled in is anything artistic. My brother has got like these kids that are uber artistic and so on like that. My DNA didn't get any of that. Let's just put it that way. So if I were to color a piece of coloring page from our children's ministry, no one is going to look at that and say, I need to copy that and sell it. Because there's no value in it whatsoever. But it's the Picassos, it's the great works of art that people try to copy and pass off as the original. And we do that with music. There's a whole caveat of the legal system that's about music plagiarism. And again, if I were to get up here and sing and play the guitar, no one would say, I want to be just like that. Now, I've got kids who are musicians and so on. I've got a son that plays guitar. He's up here today. And I've got one that plays the drums. So as you can imagine, my house sometimes is not always quiet. And so they've got that aspect of things, but nobody's going to look at me and go, hey, Brandon, you're great. And people are going to hear me sing and play whatever it is that I try to play, and they say, Brandon, stick to preaching. But great works of art, great works of music, even in sports, we find that people try to counterfeit the greatness. They try to copy the greatness. And I think what has happened here is that because of what Barnabas did, because of what other Christians were doing, and they were not doing that to be seen, but it did become visible, and people began to talk about it, maybe Ananias and Sapphira said, okay, well, we got to be that. And I think we have to ask the question, what is the sin here? But I think we have to kind of wrestle through what was going on in their minds, maybe. What was going on, and I think maybe they just wanted to belong. They just wanted to be like everybody else, and they see everybody else doing all of this stuff, and they said, well, I guess this is what we're supposed to do, but our heart's not there, but we want to be like everyone else. Maybe they wanted special recognition. Maybe they wanted to make this great big gift to the church so everybody would go up to them and say, you're so spiritual, you're so good, you're so great. Maybe everybody else was doing it and they just hopped on the bandwagon. Does that ever happen? Just everybody else is doing something, everybody else, and somebody else just jumps on because it's. I guess this is what I do. And they get caught in the hype and the emotion and so on, but yet there's really no heart in it. Maybe they wanted to rise to leadership. Maybe they wanted to be leaders in the church and they saw this as a pathway to get there. And the reason why I mention all of these is these are all things that you will see happen even in the church today. And I think also we have to understand that maybe there was a mixed bag here. Maybe there was a pure heart. Maybe there was pure, like, I want to serve Jesus, I want to do well. And they had full intention of giving everything to the church until they sold the land and had money in hand. And money that was like this eventually became like this, and they were holding it tight. That love of money thing became a real thing in their life, and it was somewhat of a, we want to do good, but do you know what we could do with this money? You see, I think it's important to understand really kind of what the sin is. I'm going to put this in just kind of simple terms. They presented a false version of themselves to God and the church. They presented a false version of themselves. They presented this version that was spiritual. And they presented this version that was generous. They presented this version that wasn't really who they were. But yet that's who they presented themselves to be. I mean, Peter even said, you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to give. You didn't have to give this away. He said, listen, it was completely at your disposal. The issue is they presented the situation as completely different than what it really was. They presented it as, no, we gave everything over, but they kept part back for themselves. When you think about this right here, I think it's important to say, this is not about giving. This is about authenticity. It's about who we are and who we are before God, and not presenting a false version of ourselves to Him and to other people. Because when we present ourselves to other people as different than who we really are, we're ultimately lying to God. And this is not just a sin then. This is a sin now. I'll never forget when I read this for the first time, and I read it again the other day, about an American preacher from the last century. His name was Donald Barnhouse. And as he was speaking and teaching on this passage, he said, if God still acted this way today, every church basement, well, we don't have a basement, but every church basement would be a morgue, and every church staff would need a mortician. And I'll have to say, and I wouldn't be your lead pastor. Because I think at some point in time, all of us have felt that pull to be something other than what we really are. And there's this idea that we have to present ourselves as having it all together. That we have this life that is perfect, that we have this walk with Jesus that is perfect, and we come into church and we shake hands and we smile and, how are you? I'm great. How are you? And inside we're dying. But we don't want to be seen as a fraud, and we don't want to be seen as not as spiritual as everyone else. So we present ourselves as this Bible-believing, Bible-thumping, Bible-memorizing, have it all together sort of Christian. When inside we're scared and we don't have it figured out. We're eking our way through our walk with Jesus. In fact, I had a professor many years ago that said that his dream for the church is that everybody would show up naked. Let's just say that's not probably a good idea. But what he was saying is we need to come without our masks, and we need to come real, and we need to come with our struggles and our pains and our difficulties and just let it out. And you know what? That's one of the things that I love about small group. I don't know about everybody else's small group, but I know mine. That there's some of us, there's about 6 or 8 of us who have been together for about 2.5 years, and we have some other folks that are in the group, and we definitely invite people in. But every once in a while, somebody will say, I don't agree with that. And we have an honest discussion, but we still love one another. And there are times that somebody will say, I just don't get it. Or somebody will say, I just don't get God, or I'm angry with God. And sometimes you'll hear words that come out that probably wouldn't be acceptable from this platform right here. But it's real, and we love one another, and we encourage one another, and we don't put on airs when we go. And sometimes we have to just say, life stinks, and I don't like life right now, and life is really difficult right now, but yet it's real. And it's not like where anybody is putting on a face that it's a pretend sort of face. And if you think about this in our culture today, social media has exploded this. Social media has just ignited a dynamite factory of people pretending to be something that they're not. In fact, a friend of mine actually shared this on social media this week, and I asked him if I could share this. May your life be as awesome as you pretend it is on Facebook. We all laugh because we know it's true. My wife says something. We crop the crap on Facebook. We pretend like it's not there. She's pretty wise. I'm just going to tell you another thing that she'll say, is that we evaluate 100% of our life based on the top 5% of other people's lives. And sometimes that may be not even a real top 5%. And so we present this image out there, and there's been psychological studies done about the dopamine drop that happens when we see that little red or whatever, and we know, oh, we got a like, or we got a comment, or we got a friend request, and so on like that. And it's just boom, 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 and it's firing our brains, and so our brains get to know what gets liked. And so sometimes maybe real doesn't get liked. And as I say that, I say guilty is charged on that. And so there's a different path. And there's a different path, but I think we have to really kind of wrestle with, why did God act so drastically? I mean, this is the part that gives me a little bit of fit. Why did God strike them dead at that moment? I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, the church is in its infancy, and religion up to that point had been playing the hypocrisy game, putting on the face, acting spiritual when in reality maybe that's not necessarily the case. But I also have to look at it this way. Hypocrisy is the enemy of transformation. Hypocrisy is the enemy of life change. You see, the reason why is it presents itself as an already transformed life. So when we pretend to be something we're not, we're blocking transformation. Now, folks, I believe that God can do anything He wants to do, and He can change anybody He wants to change. But from a human perspective, when we fail to be real and we fail to take off the parts that we're playing and the mask that we're wearing, we are robbing God of an opportunity to change our lives, because we're letting everyone else know, and even ourselves, we're there. And so I want to give you what I wrote in my journal as our bottom line, because this just won't stop. Jesus wants you, not the counterfeit you. Jesus wants you. He wants to work with you. He wants to change you. He wants you in all of your imperfection to come to Him. And folks, I don't know about you, but that's a scary place for me to be. It's a scary place. I think most of us, in our deepest, darkest parts of our heart, don't want ourselves to be known. I mean, Jim has said this, none of us wants our life put up on the big screen right here. And we are scared to be known. In fact, I've got a little sign in my office. Bertie Harkleroad gave me this sign. Bertie and I share a birthday, a little bit they're separated and so on like that by about 40 years. But the reality is, she always remembers my birthday with a card or a gift, and this particular gift is the one that has stuck with me. It's a sign that says, Jesus knows me, this I love. Truth? Jesus knows me, and it scares me to death. Jesus knows me, and it blows me away that He still loves me. And if Jesus knows me and still loves me, I have to come to grips with, I don't think anybody else, if they really knew me, would love me. And so we're scared. We're scared to be known. We're scared to let our fears out. We're afraid that we're going to be rejected if we confess a sin. We're just at that point where We don't want to be that known in our lives, so we do what Ananias and Sapphira did, and we just put on a part. We play a part. We put on a mask, and we pretend to be that person that's got it all together. I mean, how different would this story be? And it may not have made it into the Bible, but how different would it have been if Ananias and Sapphira would have come to the church and said, listen, we love Jesus, and we're still trying to learn this, and we love what Barnabas did, but we're just not there. We just don't have that kind of faith. And so would you pray for us that our faith might grow to where we could sell a field and give all of the proceeds? And maybe the story would have made it in if they would have said, sold half of it. I think if they would have sold a field and gave half of it away, they would still be considered generous. In fact, if you sold a field or a house or whatever and gave half of it to the church, we would call you generous, right? That's the reality. What if we adopted a church culture that said, you know what, it's okay to not be okay? What if we adopted a church culture that said, listen, all of us have the junk that we're dealing with in life, so it's okay to not be okay. Now, with that, understand it's not okay to stay where we are. That we know that Jesus wants to come in and radically, drastically change our life. But it's okay to be going through this because that makes you human. But with that, couple that with another statement that says, God's not done. In all of our junk, in all of our imperfection, God is not done dealing with us. In fact, everybody has their favorite parables. In fact, if I were to ask you what your favorite parable of Jesus is, I'm sure the lost son, the lost sheep, the lost coin, parable of the Good Samaritan, those would probably make it into most people's top 1 or 2 list. I love the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee who went to pray. I love this because it talks about 2 men who are from different areas of life and who are at different places with God. One who was supposedly close to God, one who was far from God. And the man who was close to God is a Pharisee. And he went into the synagogue to pray, and it tells us in Luke chapter 19 that he lifted up his hands to God and he looked up into heaven. And I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He basically told God, God, you ought to be glad that I'm on your team. I thank you for making me spiritual. I thank you for making me good. I thank you that I am not like this tax collector. But it tells us that the tax collector would not look up into heaven, but beat his chest and said, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus said, one of those men walked away justified that day. Who do you suppose it was? The one that was broken. The one that had nothing. The one that was not okay. What if we began to say that not okay is a place of brokenness, and brokenness in the hands of Jesus is a beautiful start of something brand new? What if we said brokenness is that place where God says, fine, now let's get to work? Sometime soon you're going to hear a sermon series on the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are really kind of the first teaching moment of Jesus. It's the blessed are and blessed are and blessed are passage in the 5th chapter of Matthew. And I happen to believe that the Beatitudes is a beautiful picture of transformation and growth in Jesus. But the very first Beatitude starts like this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed is brokenness, bankruptcy, a place where you have nothing to offer God, and that is the point where God says, fine, now it's time for me to start my work in you. So sometimes our next steps are, here's what you need to do. Today I want to land with, here's what you need to know. Well, number 1 is this. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to be imperfect because Jesus has given us perfection. It's okay to take off the mask and be real about what's going on in our lives. And I know that's a scary place to be. But with that, folks, okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay where you are. But another one is this: God's not done. God's not done with you. And whatever burden you're carrying, whatever you're dealing with, whatever brokenness is going on in your life, know this: when you bring that brokenness to Jesus, it's a place of a beautiful beginning where God begins some incredible work and transformation. Will you join me in prayer? Father God in heaven, I pray we bring our brokenness to you, our imperfection to you. And Father, I thank you that we've been made righteous and perfect through your Son. But in that, you have a work that you desire to complete in us. And so, Father, I pray that we come broken, knowing that only you, only your Son, can fix the brokenness inside. Jesus, move now. Thank you. In the name that is above every name, Jesus.